Hey guys, and welcome to Tnashi's Movie Corner. So, Rogue One has hit theaters. I have been anticipating this movie, really hyped for this movie, especially in the last few days. 84% on the tomato meter and a 90% audience score. I'm joined here with Brad. Say hi, Brad.
Hey, everyone.
And if you couldn't tell from the title, this will A, be spoiler filled, and B, it's gonna be crept on a little bit, right?
Indeed.
Unfortunately, this movie did not meet my expectations. I take it didn't meet yours.
Not at all.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about why this movie ultimately is a failure. So if you enjoyed the movie, that's cool. You can enjoy the movie. I certainly am glad that someone did, but I am not one of those people who overly enjoyed this movie. I will say that it is a somewhat entertaining movie. It's not a terrible movie, but I do perceive it to be a failure of a movie in terms of what it was trying to do and what we're hoping to see in the future. So let's go ahead and get right into it and list one of the reasons why I consider this movie a failure. And we're going to go with characters, specifically the main characters. So you've got a ton of new team members that are introduced into this story specifically for this mission, a mission that was only hinted at in the very opening text for A New Hope. And we have Jyn Erso, we have Cassian Andor, we have Chirrut Imwe, we have Baze. I have no idea. Baze Malibus. We have Body Rook. We have a droid that's in here, K2SO, and am I forgetting one? I think that's mostly everyone. Yeah,
Should be at least mostly.
Look, I'll be honest. These names are aside from Jyn, they're not really that easy to remember, and that's part of the problem for me. These characters I did not care about. I didn't know about these characters going into this movie, and this movie did nothing to have me care about the characters after the movie. They're okay, but there's not enough depth to them. There's not enough scenes involving them and their past and their decisions and why they do something, and there's just not enough personality there to stand out.
Which was, again, as you said, one of the bigger problems because, we kind of knew what this mission was. We knew it would succeed. We knew that there was going to be an ultimate cost to the success of this mission, which was all the more important that these characters be somebody that you really sympathize with and that you really felt tug at your heartstrings when they passed away. But we're just not given enough to actually connect with them because everybody's backstory comes down to like 1 to 2 lines.
Yeah, there's just nothing. There's nothing really there to push some of these characters. I mean, you have the Imperial fighter or whatever who is supposed to deliver this crucial information as far as the Death Star plans and the weakness and everything. And so, why did he turn against the Empire? Well, just because reasons. Like, there's not enough to establish his reasoning why. We have our main character with Jyn Erso, who should be and does present opportunities to be against kind of the rebellion and what they stand for because of how they've affected her life and her growing up and her dad and everything. And yet, all of a sudden, even with Galen Erso's death at the hands of them, she quickly turns around and says, hey, we got this way to beat them and I need your help. So there's no processing moment there for her to really think it over. We have Cassian, who shows up at the very beginning, seems like, which brings this interesting idea, and we'll get more into that later, but the concept of being what he's able to do in order to achieve the goals that the rebels have, right? Their ultimate goals of winning. Yet there's no moment really of clarity with him where he turns sides. He just kind of switches his mindset. So there's a lot of characters here that could have been interesting, seem kind of interesting in paper, but it's literally paper thin as to their development depth and everything. And there's just not enough to care for them. And we're going to get more into the ending of it. But I think ultimately the way it panned out too, there are so many movies that does this kind of concept better of introducing us to brand new characters and having us care about them. So when their death happens, we feel that for them. And aside from Jin having a moment or 2 moments with Galen, one hologram form and one when he's dying, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel any other connection. And I think that's really just Felicity's acting that brought that for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have felt anything at all. Do you have anything to add to that?
I'm just going to kind of more or less agree with what you said. You know, Jin actually does have an interesting story, I guess. It's just not really told. Cassian has an interesting like motivation perspective, you know, that, and so he'd be an interesting like archetype for the rebellion, but you don't really get it, you know. It's only on the surface, and then you get into the other members of Rogue One, and like as you pointed out, they don't really make sense. Like the Temple Guardian that somehow is just able to loiter around in the streets, or the pilot that defected for no apparent reason, or Saw Gerrera, who's supposed to be very important personally to Jyn Erso, and we know him from other things. He just doesn't really do much, and he's one on the list of characters that just kind of throws everything away for no apparent reason.
Right. So, and that's actually going to lead me to my next point, because besides of our main cast of people, which I don't feel enough connection to care about, which was a big disappointment for this. Another disappointment for it is some of the things that they brought into this. There's some callbacks that kind of work. There's a reference to the black saber, which we've seen in Rebels and in Clone Wars. You know, there's a reference to Hera in this. There's a reference to Ghost. There's even a reference to Chopper that I missed. So, you know, there's things like that that'll work. But then you brought in Saw Gerrera, who is an established character in the Clone Wars. You bring him into this, played by Forrest Whitaker, and not only does he lack screen time, but he lacks any overall significance to the story. He didn't do much. He didn't do much of anything. So I don't like it when things like that happen. When Bail Organa's first brought in, he does nothing. You hear the Star Wars kind of theme going, but he says nothing there, so he has no importance to that. And in fact, even later when he comes back for another scene, it's basically just to say, hey, this is where I'm going, and this is where I'm setting up for episode 4, which I didn't think you actually had to establish that kind of thing. So you kind of have some moments like that where I feel like certain characters and certain things are out of, like, they don't work because of how the delivery was for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that pretty strongly. You know, it's just overall, it's hard for me to think what were they actually doing with this movie, because it just doesn't hold at all.
Yeah.
You know.
And we're gonna get into this now. As far as the actual plot is concerned, as far as the actual plot is concerned, like, or not even the plot, the structure of the movie is very much a mess. Now, I've seen a movie earlier this year, and I'm going to actually compare it to that for more than one way, I guess. But for Suicide Squad, that movie was a mess, particularly in the beginning of the movie. There's a lot of cutscenes and different music playing all over the place, and it felt out of place. It felt like it was rushing too much. And this movie kind of did the same structure at the beginning. We have an opening scene with Jyn as a little girl or whatever to set up, I guess, part of her character. Then we jump to another planet and we do this other thing. Then we jump again to another. Like, there's
How
so
many
much
places did we go to? Like 6?
I don't know. There's
within like 2 minutes.
So much jumping around, and it really disconnected me from the opening sequence, which did not incorporate a crawl, which I honestly think this movie would have benefited from more so now than before when I hadn't seen it. I feel like the crawl would have helped, because with the crawl we could have established some of the tissue that we needed to push the plot forward, to open then on the plot on Jyn, and then through some flashback sequences or even conversations with Saw Gerrera establish what their importance was to each other and where they came from, and it would have helped with character introductions. I feel like this movie just kind of pushed things and pushed things out, and it lost a lot of focus, more so in the first half than in the last half, because the last third of the movie, which everyone likes, and I can understand that, was just one big battle. You know, so there wasn't much to do. Whereas they had so much flipping around in the first part of it, it just felt off-putting. The pace was off.
And that's the thing too, is as you said, it just kind of jumped into it, and that was the very first jarring thing, was just a like, bam, we're right into this. And if it had followed, and I realize this is a standalone film, but if it had followed more of what like the other movies in Star Wars have done, you would have had more of the setup for things, and like, even for the characters themselves, and their interconnections and all that kind of stuff. That would have probably made a lot more sense. Instead, you're just given a very, like, we go here for a second, we go here for a second, we go here for a second. It's like, do you remember everything? Good. We're moving on,
Right. And so none of that kind of worked for me in the beginning, and I think for a lot of people it didn't work, which is funny because this movie's so high up there. Yet the first third didn't work, the last third did work, and the middle was like, nah. So I don't know how that evens out to be a great movie, but apparently it does. So we're going to get into something now where the whole premise of this, of course, is about stealing the Death Star plans. Yes. The thing is, they incorporated they incorporated something to fix Episode 4 as far as the problem is concerned, saying that, there was this one little chute that you can fire down and it would go straight to the core of the Death Star and blow it all up. Why is that there? Well, that's there because Galen Erso put it there. It was a design flaw. So that's supposed to fix, a problem that we had.
Which I will say is a better answer than what we had,
yes,
about having no inkling as whatsoever. However, it still doesn't obviously completely fix that problem, because that doesn't really make sense as to how one engineer among all those engineers and all the architects that would have gone into building it and all that kind of stuff was able to slip this through. So it improves the score, but still doesn't give it a passing grade.
Right. And the other thing is, with this being established that it's supposed to fix that, we get the last few minutes with the battle scene, and things kind of go out the window, in my opinion, because we have this message, the plans or whatever, which are delivered to the ship, this big rebel ship. I forget what it's called. Do you know the name?
I honestly don't.
Okay, well, there's this big rebel ship, and attached to this rebel ship, lo and behold, is Leia's ship. Now, the thing that gets me is we see a really cool sequence with Vader, and we're going to get more into him, but we see a cool sequence with him trying to get the plans, ultimately to have them end up on Leia's ship and her to take off, and Vader to watch it leave. That makes no sense when going into Episode 4, where they're trying to lie their way out of being caught with the plans. And it doesn't make sense as far as rebel spies transmitting the plans to the ship in the first place.
They more or less straight up attack the place.
Yeah.
And also, it would mean that Leia went straight from this battle to try to pick up Obi-Wan, and could have risked Obi-Wan getting captured or killed by the Empire.
Right, because obviously she was directly pursued by Vader at this point. Not that she was on her way there and then suddenly Vader came after her, which would have made more sense for me. So this kind of brought up quite a few more questions in that regard of, how exactly does that work? Because I don't feel like it does. Also feel like part of it is it kind of takes away from the opening crawl of A New Hope for reason, because you're established, like, this already happened, so now you're taking away what's being established in that crawl. And also, just a small thing, there's a note of the rebels' first victory being on stealing these plans, yet we see them bomb the facility where Galen was working
with the other
with the other
engineers.
engineers. So they just bombed the heck out of it. Wouldn't that be a victory? Like, I don't understand.
And that's the thing, is like it really feels like the rebels can just go to somewhere and attack it like at will.
Yeah,
You know?
it doesn't feel like there's a struggle with them. Like they are just they're struggling for victory. They're struggling to keep going because they're beat down. They're a small group. They don't have that much resources. And in this last battle, as cool as it is, there's just like an army of them that come in there. So
And that was our impression, watching the original trilogy, is that the rebellion actually took time to get to where it was at the end of 6. You know, because, and that is something that normally would have to be built into after a long time. I mean, you can't just steal warships from the Empire so easily. But it's like, but yeah, that completely threw out the what, because, they can openly attack places with no consequences whatsoever to the rebellions.
the other problem is AT-ATs. They are on the ground fighting. They're intimidating. The scale is really nice. I like that. As far as the look and everything goes, and they should be intimidating. But then we have X-Wings come in and, well, destroy them. And that's not supposed to be possible. Like, not like that. That's not supposed to happen. There's a whole reference in Empire about why that's not supposed to be possible. So I'm not sure why you would put that in here, because it just lists another problem that you then later have to address. So for a movie that was supposed to kind of address a problem and then establish an individual story, I've so far mentioned that the characters don't work for an individual story, and there are inconsistencies with the plot which don't flow with the other movies to make it said individual story and to make it coherent with the other movies. It just brings more problems.
They also very clearly seem to forget like how many people they actually have down, because on the surface later on it feels like there's an army attacking an army for this thing, even though their group only comprised of like 10 people. And you see people getting gunned down all over the place, but there's still more people around. So it's like they forgot what their actual number was and decided to just kind of wing it out. And then they have the everybody here gets an honorable death, a heroic death,
right,
as they go through, even though that wasn't really the thing that we were supposed to be setting up for.
And it takes away from this war aspect. Everyone says that this movie feels like a war film, and the great thing about some war films out there is that characters will just up and die. They will just die out, and there's no heroic death there. They just die, and it's one of those things where we establish with these characters for so long that we feel for them, and when it just happens like that, it really sucks. And for these characters, no, they all kind of got their honorable death. It just doesn't fit. It feels like it's too stylized. It stands out from being what should have been a war film. So I don't appreciate that. And then you have, even talking about the Death Star, you have a whole big deal about destroying Jeddah, off just right on target, destroy Jeddah, which in turn destroys Saw Gerrera's place, which conveniently is very close nearby, so I don't know how people couldn't find them.
It's not exactly hidden. I mean, it's a giant, temple-like building.
Which one of these rocks has them? Well, it must be the one with the construction out front. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, then you have them, attempting to destroy the rebels and everything that are down on the planet. So...
And this is where we develop Stormtrooper aim.
It really is, because we're going to shoot away from it so that it gives you... You're supposed to get more of an impactful death because you have more time with the characters to sit there watch as it's approaching. I would have thought they would have at least not given up and looked for a ship, because they're literally in a shipyard kind of thing. Like there should have been ships around, or try, but they didn't even try. But that's whatever. So they just watch as this happens, and it's just like, yeah, okay. For the record, not everyone needed to die in this movie. I mean, they don't get mentioned at all in episode 4. It's not like episode 6, where they talk about many Bonthans losing their lives to retrieve, these plans or whatever. It's not like that. There's literally no reference to these people dying. Just the fact that, oh well, they can't obviously be in 4 because they're not in 4, and I
Right.
think there's a way that you could have gotten around that, but Disney didn't want to do it, so that's them.
And it's still, I realize it probably bothers me more than it bothers you, but that space battle though,
Yeah,
them, I mean, there's probably a list of these things. And one, like, they shoot at the energy field instead of shooting at the thing that's creating the field, which
right.
is just basic common sense.
Yeah,
They have like one of those hammerhead whatever ships.
from Rebels.
Yeah, it's in Rebels, and that's
Old Republic,
and it's
too.
from callback from the Old Republic, but it's like super
Call back
tiny.
to the callback.
It's super tiny, yeah.
Yeah.
And it like rams into a star destroyer, hits another star destroyer, just tears it all up to hell, and then those things like hit the generator and take that down.
Right,
you
which
know?
is interesting concept, but kind of awkward execution there. So I don't know. I get that one. I think the space battle overall was cool. There's some nice throwbacks to episode 4 with some of the pilots and everything. So I think that's cool. And it looks, for the most part, good. That's where we see Ghost as a quick cameo. So that's cool. So I think part of that works, but I agree that there's things that obviously don't work within the realm of that. So even the coolest part, there's things that don't work. And then I'm gonna go to the humor now. The humor did not work for me for the most part. There's a scene where Chirrut is being, had a bag put over his head, and he's like, "Well, I'm blind,"
He's like, "Are you kidding me? I'm blind. You don't need to,
that was
to
funny.
blind me." As it hurt.
So that was good. K2SO is supposedly the standout from this film, but there's more moments that I think kind of failed to deliver for me than did. And it's just another droid that apparently has this type of personality, and a long line of droids that apparently have these personality. And I don't know, I feel like it takes away a little bit from the original droids, which showcase personality because they were unique. Out of all the droids around that didn't have this, they showcased personality and they were standouts. And now every movie has to have this.
But this droid though was like, "Yeah, I'm coming along. This guy made me."
Right. It was a different type of humor, like, but that was the point.
Why don't I get a blaster?
Yeah. Which they don't really make a big deal out of. It's like, why didn't I get a blaster? He doesn't get a blaster, and later on he's just given a blaster. Like, there's no big impactful moment there. It just kind of fails in that regard. Then you have Vader with his oh man, I thought it was bad.
Cheesy
until Vader made his just like basically like choke on this. That would have been a better line. Don't choke on your aspirations or whatever. It ended up being like, that's terrible. I've never heard ambitions.
I think it's ambition.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter. It's all bad. It's all bad. So that scene kind of, I appreciate seeing Mustafar and seeing Vader kind of in this palace that we've never seen before and we'll probably never see since. But it's kind of interesting because that does kind of feed into a little bit of the lore, right? It expands on something, which is fine. But then to have him deliver such a bad line of dialogue, I was like, this is not Vader. This is not who Vader is. So I didn't appreciate that. But however, we get a scene later, which for the most part works, where he's, attacking through the ship. He's trying to retrieve the plans using his powers and everything. He feels like that intimidating presence that you get in episode 4. The only qualm I have about that is he literally can force pull the plans to him, and he fails to do so. So for all his force power, he apparently let that go. But anyway, so those are some of the reasons why I feel like this movie fails. It had such potential. There's so much that could have been there, which is surprising for a story that I didn't care to know beforehand. I don't think you cared to know beforehand.
But I did not. I looked at this movie and I was interested because it was like, okay, well, this is going to be a darker film. It's going to be a grittier film, talking about this stuff. And, it was just like, okay, well, let's see where this goes. A Star Wars that doesn't really have like Jedi and, the more fantastical elements. So I was curious to see what kind of movie this would turn out to be, and unfortunately, I just left disappointed.
The biggest problem I think I have with this film is overall character. Overall, that's not even counting the main cast, but we'll go through them. The main cast completely forgettable, not enough moments, right? Saw Gerrera, wasted character. Aside from him being a name dropped from, Clone Wars, absolutely wasted. Galen Erso, not enough time with, didn't really know him. We have our kind of main villain throughout this, Ben Mendelsohn as Orson Krennic, who is just, he could have been someone interesting because he was another kind of lead guy, one of the top-headed guys. So we could have gotten a lot more to his character, and we didn't get much into his character, except that he got screwed over by his own empire, pretty much. I mean, that's basically it. So we didn't get much more to him. We didn't get anything to really bring more to Mon Mothma, even though I liked seeing Guinevere O'Reilly back as Mon Mothma, because she was in a deleted scene of episode 3, so that was nice. We didn't get more to the character of Bail Organa, again, even though I liked seeing him back. We didn't get anything to establish deeper into his character. So there are all these characters that were kind of thrown in here, and none of them got anything to keep me with this movie. This movie just kind of failed in all aspects of it. Whereas in episode 4, we had Luke, but we had a reason to look to Luke because he was that every guy kind of thing, and look what he's taking on. Even Leia as the princess or whatever that you're supposed to go and save, she even had some moments to her character as well, and she had a bit of an attitude, a little back and forth and everything. Han Solo was the biggest developed character because he went from scoundrel to kind of friend at the end of it, but it took the whole film to change. So this film just didn't do anything there, and it presents concepts like being like the rebels being willing to go to certain levels like the Empire would to retrieve information to get at what they need accomplished, but it doesn't explore that. It just introduces it and then lets it ride out. So I feel like this movie is a mess because it has some things in there here or there, but it doesn't deliver on them. It doesn't let them really expand themselves. It just introduces the idea and lets it fade off.
And that's the thing too. It's like these characters, from what I'm thinking, could have all been like really interesting, and there actually could have been a lot of really well done interpersonal connections if you thought about like what's his name, Galen Erso. The fact that he and the director, used to be friends, and they seem like they were possibly like close friends. But that's not explored enough.
No, we don't.
And then
explore
there's obviously a connection between Urso and wow, I'm just drawing all kinds of blanks here.
Can't remember people.
Okay, Saw Gerrera, but that relationship is like nowhere to be seen, But that would have actually played a important thing between the two of them and between Jin and Saw when Saw ends up having to take over for raising her and training her and all that kind of stuff.
Right, which would have been useful to see in the actual flashbacks than to get the opening thing that we did, which I didn't feel even worked from us.
And the thing is, we know that Saw's his part of the rebellion is actually known for being more, I guess, brutal in the way that they go about tactics.
Yeah, but we don't see much of that either.
Which actually is a very big thing because, obviously Jin used to be a part of them, and she makes a comment as to where she doesn't really believe in the rebellion so much, any form of it, because she's like, rebellions tend to get other people, like, hurt and killed. So that kind of would have
played out better if we had seen something to establish that.
It's not there. And then, of course, you have... what's... Okay, Cassian, who's just kind of like, he's like, I've been a part of this since I was a child. You don't understand the real grittiness that has to go into us succeeding. So he's a little bit more along the lines as,
Stop name dropping people. You're not gonna
well,
remember.
you keep moving the thing away from our list here. Saw, from his group. So he's more like that, except he's the intelligence officer. So it's not like he just straight up has to attack people. He's more or less like having to do things from
But that one
sabotage.
line is what you get. You don't get the actual reasoning why he changes his mind. It just changes his mind. So that's like issues I have with this.
And that's the thing, if Jin had really gone into her thing about her perspective regarding the rebellion and collateral damage and all that kind of stuff, and you had her pair with Casey, who's like, yeah, they're collateral damage, but you do what you have to succeed in the mission, and then you have like Bodhi, who's like, hey, I just agreed to drop off this message. I'm kind of I was on board with you guys, but now I feel like super over my head on this.
Mm-hmm.
You would have had you could have really brought up about this dynamic between the group and how different all of them were, and then how made a bigger deal about how they all had to come together to ultimately succeed. But it just wasn't, because we didn't get enough time with anybody to really bring that out.
Right. Another thing is, I'm just putting it out there. I don't have to have another powerful female character who has to be looked at in awe, kind of in a moment, right? So Jin Erso does this battle, this fight scene with these stormtroopers, and Cassian's there, and he has his blaster ready, but he just kind of stands there and looks in awe of what she's doing. I don't need that. I get it. Jin's a strong character. It doesn't matter. I understand the notion of having strong women in these Star Wars movies. Apparently, we're going to get a lot of those. That doesn't bother me. I've always seen stronger female women in these Star Wars movies. But the point is, you don't have to highlight it by having someone look in awe. Like, this is the second movie in a row that I've seen that happen, and I don't feel like it's necessary.
And then Saul had to be like, well, you were my best at 16.
Right, because every one of these main characters now has to be the best at something. Because that's just the way it works. You were my best rebel. You were my best pilot. You were my best stormtrooper. You were my best engineer. You know what? You were the best at being the best.
You're just all around OP.
Yeah, you're just all around OP. That's right. So, yeah, ultimately this movie just fails for me at being a Star Wars movie, because it kind of feels like you see that it wants to kind of stand alone. It has all these characters and everything, but it has so many callbacks to the original trilogy and tying into the original, and all these cameos that are forced in there, and then all this other, like, the presentation of it so awkward and jarring and everything, that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So while I can't say I hated it like I may have hated another Star Wars film before, or however many, I can honestly say that this was the biggest disappointment, because it does nothing to establish the need for more standalone films. It does nothing to push that drive or to push any need for me to have any more films, honestly, because it fails on all these fronts. Any last things you want to add?
No, I think if we wanted to, there's a whole lot of this movie that we could just kind of go through bit by bit, but
Yeah.
I think the general idea is just there. This just, between the characters and the issues that go with the continuity, because this does continuity, yes, because it does tie into the other movies. It's just, it doesn't really work for me. It really could have, because obviously the potential definitely was there, but they just didn't give it the treatment that it needed.
Yeah, good ideas, sloppy execution. That's my thing. That's why this movie fails. Good ideas, sloppy execution, and I do mean sloppy, all over the place. So anyway, that'll wrap this up, though. I'm not really going to go ahead and give much of a rating for this movie. I'm going to say it barely crosses the midway point for me. So it just barely crosses enough to where I will actually end up buying it. But it's something that I will watch every blue moon, or every 2 suns, or however you want to put it. That's when I'll see it, because it just does nothing. It's one of those things where I'd almost rather just watch a recap than watch the whole thing. But what about you? Is that kind of where it falls for you, or lower?
I agree with that. It's above Force Awakens for me, because I absolutely just hated that movie.
Well, I wasn't going to mention that, but okay.
But, it doesn't really match with the other ones, because the other ones, despite flaws and other things that existed within them, were better told because they were more coherently told.
Mm-hmm.
Versus this one just didn't want to invest in anything because it ultimately I guess it felt like doing more investment wouldn't really pay off. So,
Right.
yeah, it's on the bottom of my list.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. And did you like it? Did you hate it? Are you kind of in between? Like, go ahead and let me know in the comments below what drove you to this opinion one way or another. I like having conversations. Hopefully, if you enjoyed this video, you can go and click on the link in the description below to go to Patreon and become a Patreon supporter. I really appreciate you guys that would take the time to do something like that. Obviously, it helps a lot with getting this channel and helping it grow. Hopefully you enjoyed this vid. Click that like button, share it, subscribe to my channel, and watch my other vids. I do appreciate it. And until next time,
Peace.